Aaron LeMay.
Mr. Pete Sena II.
That got weird really quick. What's going on, guys? I am Pete Sena. I'm the co-founder. I'm the CEO and, right? Hold on. Let's cut. Yeah, sorry. All right. So, Aaron LeMay.
Yeah.
What's going on, dude? How are you?
Doing good, man. It's good to be here.
Good to have you, man. It's been a while, but not too long of a while. So.
It does. It feels like it's been. Has it been about a year since the last time I was here?
In person, yeah.
In person, yeah.
In spirit, it's a daily thing, obviously.
Yes, obviously.
So, this is obviously a little fun for me. This is a little bit off because, to you guys, Aaron's kind of like a demigod. For me, he's just like a dude that I drink beers with. But no, all jokes aside. So, really excited to have Aaron LeMay here. Really, Aaron, tell the team a little bit about your past. I mean, obviously, 20 plus years in the gaming industry,
right.
Clearly one of the most fast-paced industries on the planet. I would say it moves faster than advertising, if that's even possible.
Wow, yeah.
So take us through just like, who the hell are you?
Sure.
I'm super stoked to share with the group just what you're doing with the Gamer's Way, which is really a movement to help people level up in life.
That's right.
And I think none of that would be possible without that sort of trials and tribulations of the gaming industry or that experience.
Absolutely.
So, give us a little bit on you.
Absolutely. So I'm Aaron LeMay. I've been in the game industry for about 25 years, and I first started out in what's called QA, quality assurance, testing games. So you can imagine testing games for 15 hours a day.
No.
And you can't. The very first game I worked on was called McKinsey and Company, and it was a game designed for girls. It was the first PC game for girls, and it came with like a tube of lipstick with it. And it was back in the day when they had like CD-ROMs. And the whole marketing thing was like, it includes 5 CD-ROMs, more value for your buck, that kind of thing. And so I had to basically pretend I was a teenage girl playing a game, picking out clothes, and convincing a guy to go to prom with me.
That certainly takes gender fluidity to a whole different place.
It was so cutting edge, way above. So I started there, and then got into doing art production. I was a junior artist, and just started really looking at like the game industry as a whole. Like, what can I possibly do? How can I help the group? And what can I learn? And the beautiful thing about being in the game industry was that anything was possible. Granted, there's people that are specialized in animation and whatnot, but my tactic was like, well, let me take it as far as I can. I went into concept art. I did level design. I went to Volition, and I was a level designer there for Red Faction 2.
I love that game.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it was awesome. And then from there, after Red Faction 2, we had a whole awesome series of like pitching games, and I pitched a game called Saints Row, which is like, I don't know if you've heard of that franchise or not, but it was
pretty much like spent a lot of time.
It was, to me, it was so fun to work with a group of people and given like certain briefs in your world, and kind of going, well, what's another way that we can approach this brief?
Really? So
yeah.
What was the original brief?
The original brief was like, it's got to be a military squad-based shooter.
Right.
World War II. It's
so
pretty.
What was like? Help me just sort of ground the audience here, because I got a lot of new people tuned in. Like, what games were really popular while you were trying to solve that? Because it sounds like, I know a little bit of this because we're friends. Like, you essentially took, I call it design thinking, but you essentially took a problem, turned it on its head, and solved it in a very different way that
Absolutely.
Created a pop culture sensation, essentially, right? So, talk to the group a little bit about like what games were the ones, like why military squad shooter like at that time?
Right. So, Volition at the time had just created Red Faction 2. It was doing really well. They also did Summoner 2, which didn't do so well.
Right, I remember that game, yeah.
And so they're like, we got to come up with a solution. And to their genius, they broke up the groups. Broke up the teams into smaller groups and said, hey, here are the parameters to pitch game ideas.
Okay.
So there was about, I think there was 7 or 8 groups, and we had 3 topics to, so basically 6 weeks to do 3 games.
Wow.
So each group would pitch a game idea. Brilliant model. And out of that, Punisher was picked and Saints Row was picked.
Nice.
And it was called Bling Bling. That was the working name.
Nice.
And so working with that brief, I was talking with the team, I'm like, what are some other examples of squad-based in our culture? You know, there's cowboys and Indians, there was, gangs, of course, there was like cults, we were looking at all the different kind of things that, what's going to be moving in pop culture. So we were taking like analysis, deep thinking, as well as like looking at data, where's hip hop tracking? Right. And so we really started honing in on that, and it was a very much of a departure from what Volition was used to.
Right.
And so they took a big gamble on building a whole new engine and whatnot. So that was the thinking around it, was like, what's the opportunity in this landscape? Because I had gone to E3 with a bunch of buddies and saw like the movement of first-person shooters as well as like military shooters. I'm like, by the time we come up with this game,
it's old news.
Yeah, it's just going to be about flooded market.
Yeah.
So that's where that came from.
So sort of what I'm hearing, like you say, is like you took all these different inputs from your teams, from pop culture, from data, from creativity, sort of put it all together, sort of let it simmer a bit, and came up with something that essentially created a multi-billion-dollar franchise, right? So I guess the question is, how the hell did you do that? And then just back to your background, it's like, so now you helped to create and launch and pitch Saints Row, which many people watching this will clearly love that game. Like it was like, for me, the predecessor to like games like GTA 5, like performing lots of nods to that clearly, right? And then you went on to do what?
So after that, I went on to be an art director at Bungie on Halo. And so
one of the basically top grossing games ever on the planet. Right?
Well, the funny thing about that is that I was living with a group of guys, and I was we were talking about goal setting, and I was like, hey, my 5-year goal plan is to be working for Bungie and being an art director.
Right.
And all my buddies there were just like, oh, this is awesome, right? And what's funny is like every one of those roommates of mine ended up getting a job there at Bungie. Right. And I was like the last one. I did it all in 4 years, but it was like a testament to what it's important to put.
I did it all in 4.
Well, I didn't mean to come off like that, but it's just like it's more about, for the viewers, like once you put your energy into something, absolutely, and like have those conversations in that direction,
totally,
then it gives you that focus. And it's like what we call goal setting, right? And talking about it with other pros. And them getting excited about it gave that focus for them too. So it was really cool to see how that like momentum happened.
Yeah. Aaron, one of the things I would love for you to tell the group about is like, so at that point you sort of pitched one of the most successful franchises. You're literally working on launching and shaping both the game and the marketing and the branding for, the Halo franchise, which is like, people would dream of that. So now you're at the top of that mountain, right? And you've set all these intentions. I know you're a big meditator, I am as well. You set all these intentions. You're at the top of the mountain. Like, what's beyond that, right? So, like, because I think it sort of like after that, like, how did you go about thinking about what you're going to do with your career next, and like, how did this whole movement that you call the gamers way sort of start to formulate for you? Like, I think because that for me is something. It's like, I remember myself. You get to that pinnacle, right? I have friends who are music artists,
right? That
will not be named, but it's like, I got to the top of my career. It's like I'm working with Lady Gaga, I'm working with Fender, I'm working with these top MTV, all these top brands. Sure. And then it's like, well, what's next, right? Because we spend our whole careers like dreaming of that moment, and then it happens in an instant, right?
Right.
What's next? So help us understand that.
Yeah. So with that, like it's like dropping off into the abyss for some people. Yeah. Right. It's like once you achieve that goal, then it's like, what's my purpose of life?
Right. And that's do a lot of drugs and die like most rock and roll people.
Get addicted to it, to entertainment. What I took that opportunity to really investigate and dive into what lights me up.
Right.
And to me, this is like a challenge that I often give to people, is like, challenge your assumptions. Challenge, like, a lot of times because we're good at something, we think that's what we should be doing, right? I assumed like, art lights me up, painting lights me up. It was like when I really investigated deeply into it, it really didn't so much. What really lit me up was helping people level up in life. Like, having these kind of conversations where I can provide a perspective and say, hey, here's a way of progressing. That's one thing I learned about being an art director and on working on Halo, working with these amazing individuals, hugely talented people, not just within Bungie, but in other arenas, and bringing them all together and to create this experience for other people to dive into.
Right.
And I kept thinking, like, well, what are ways that I can codify this and like make a system that would help other people, and whether it be like families or friends or whatnot. I started experimenting and creating these little mini games, these social experiments.
Oh, cool.
And so I would work with my team, and I had a really challenging, how do I say it? I had very challenging situations with individuals that caused me to reflect on, like, well, what am I bringing to the plate here?
Give me an example, just again, don't want to oust anybody here, but give me an example of a challenging situation. I'm sort of reading between the lines on that one, but
yeah,
like, what's a challenging situation with your team?
Well, sometimes you have like a request that, say for instance, you're working on a marketing campaign, and
make the logo bigger.
Yeah, stuff like that. And someone's being really challenging about, like, they're being stubborn, they're really sticking to an outdated vision of something.
Outdated vision, okay.
Or they're just creatively stuck.
Okay.
And they may not necessarily be aware of it. So the challenge then is like communicating in such a way that you have a wider bandwidth.
Okay.
Because a lot of people's bandwidth is just like, that's their view, that's their render cone, this is how they're seeing the world.
Right.
And as a director, you're creatively directing attention in a way that helps people get to that solution.
Right.
In a way that they come up with it themselves. So at first,
so more of a coach, less of a player, really.
Yeah, and I sucked at it at first. I was horrible. I was giving horrible direction because it was like I was trying to do everything and control everything, and instead of letting people be pro.
Yeah.
It was a very humbling lesson. And once I kind of stepped back and really looked into, like, well, how can I be of service here? And then providing that, like, instead of looking at it as a challenge and flipping on its head, like, well, everything in the game is giving me feedback to lift things up.
Right.
So that's where the gamer's way really was born from, is looking at these situations and kind of going, what would be the opposite of that? What would it look like if I, instead of having friction against something, to just be with it and play with it?
Right. So it's almost like, what I'm hearing is like sort of emotional intelligence and mindfulness, but on Red Bull.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. Yeah. And it's all real time, right? So like a lot of what we're doing is we have a design challenge, we have a personality challenge, whether it be with a publisher or a vendor, and then how do you navigate that?
Yeah, totally.
And having a system that like really makes it a way of play, as opposed to a way of like a friction.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. And I think, again, I know this is always hard to know what the audience does or doesn't know, but so you've had now, so you left the gaming industry officially, right? Yeah,
I worked for, after Bungie, I worked for a game publisher called Inmass Entertainment, and we did a game
called
Terra, right? They made Terra. I was a
Dope
creative
game,
I was a creative director on that, and we worked on a series of other games, foreign games, and brought them over to the US. And there, I basically took this methodology and started really implementing it with my team and training them, and experimenting with that, and experimenting with vendors and other game developers and whatnot. And that's where I started really refining that.
Right.
And then after that, I worked for a capital investment firm, White Rhino Capital, and became a chief creative officer on that, and really started looking at like the business of things and how business is really working.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So now you're working with like top companies. I know I don't know how many of them you can talk about because they get kind of squirrely with that. But like a lot of the tech companies that I've got on my phone that I turn to for transportation or entertainment or catching up on things are companies that you're working with now. What are they calling upon you for, and how is Gamer's Way and the way that you think and apply things adding value for them and their businesses?
That's a great question. I'm finding out what I'm being called for most of all is helping people at the very base level just have awesome conversations.
Okay.
Because I believe that, at least the way that I think about life, is that everything around us is created from a conversation. these awesome shoes to, the lighting kit to the cameras.
Right.
If there was a no in any part of this series, then it wouldn't be made. Right? I mean, it's real obvious, but when you really think of it from that standpoint, then it's like, oh, well, then if I get really good at conversations and widen my bandwidth with it, then I can create anything. And so a lot of times what I'm being called upon to do is to work with leadership, work with trains that go by, to work with leadership and to work with how they communicate with their contributors and other developers. I work with anywhere from banks to game companies to marketing companies, hospitals, whatnot. And the common thread is like, well, you've been working with moving attention and gamifying, like an experience. And I'm bringing that to like, how do I say it? I bring it to light, like this is already inbuilt in our culture.
Yeah.
Gaming is now.
Right.
And it's just bringing to light like these systems, these strategies that we already have. And it's just activating that.
Right.
And once we activate that, then it's like, then we can start taking action on it.
Yeah, no, and you've obviously done a tremendous amount of work with, I've hired you as a coach for our team and working with our leadership team, and I've had the pleasure of sort of seeing the magic of Gamers Way, so I'm definitely drinking the Kool-Aid, to say the least. But I think, for me, the one thing that I just would love for you to sort of walk the group through is that transition from staying at the top of the mountain and going, what's next? Because, I could argue that you had a series of epiphanies or one sort of defining moment where you really understood that your purpose was to help others level up, right? So I think the question that I always ask is, if I'm on the come up as a pro in my respective industry, whatever it is, marketing, advertising, technology, as I'm on the rise, what are some of the things I can do? What are some of those mini games that I can play to understand where I'm going, right? Because I think, I work with a lot of youth. I work everything from undergrads and high school kids all the way up to PhDs and leaders of companies. And the question I've stopped asking, because it's a bad question, I learned that the hard way, is what are you passionate about, right?
Yeah.
And like passion is like the greatest thing ever if you know what it is. Yeah. But it's like the worst question ever if it's like, well, how do I discover my passion? How do I discover my purpose? Yeah. I hear that a lot, like, how do I discover my purpose? And for me, it's like such an easy answer because I've been blessed, you've been blessed, we know our purposes, right? But help the sort of group and the audience understand if there was one thing that they could take away from this conversation, other than that they can do it and that they have the tools to do it, it's where do I start so that I can find my next mountain?
Well, you always start where you stand, as I like to say. And like the one thing that I find that's the most helpful is like inquiring to what am I naturally drawn to? Okay. Like what think of your life as a character in a game, right? Okay. And what's your skill set? What do you find yourself utilizing?
An axe.
Right. So then you chart trees, right? Whatever. Or people or whatever. Who knows? But like looking in it really gets down to everything about the Gamer's Way is bringing you to the present moment and inquiring into, well, what am I here? What am I playing right now? What's my game giving me feedback on? Right. It's really slowing down instead of being on the phone all the time and being distracted to actually like, well, what's the feedback? What's the score? And the one thing that I really encourage people, because I get this a lot too. Just had a conversation just a moment ago with one of your staff, and they're like, my purpose. That was the same thing. Like, how do I get my purpose? I'm real good at certain things. Right. But is that my purpose? Ah, okay. Right? So there's a distinction. And I like to, help people like get that place of just give yourself permission to be like, it's okay right now and to not know. Right. But just to keep playing.
See, I want to interrupt you for 1 second because I think it's bullshit the way that people think about scores, right? And I think we think about it wrong, right? When I say we, I think society thinks about scores wrong, right? It's like this generation. I'm young enough to be considered on the millennial, but sort of on the cusp, not, right? And there's obviously millennial's not a generation; it's a series of segments, right? A 25-year-old is very different than a 27 or a 29-year-old. There's rites of passage, stages, right?
Mm-hmm.
Micro changes. But for me, score always comes back to like I win, you lose, zero-sum game.
I see.
Right? So it's like I got promoted, you didn't, so you're upset with me.
Sure.
Right? It didn't happen to me. Look what's happening to me. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I see that a lot with the students I work with. I see that a lot with the people in the companies we work with.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, I don't see it a whole lot in our own company, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But talk to me about, you said score, and score to you, I'm guessing, is not zero-sum game. It's not I win, you lose. It's not I've got 5, you've got 2.
Right.
Help me understand
For sure.
score.
Yeah.
Help our audience understand score and how they can think about this with a broader render cone, to use your language.
Absolutely. And so the way that you can frame it for yourself is score is simply feedback from the game, how you're progressing on some level.
Okay.
Like when you're playing an MMO, a massively multiplayer online game, like the score is the quest line.
Okay.
Right? That's a way of looking at it.
Sure, yeah. It's the mechanic of the game.
The mechanic, right? And it's the feedback. So I like to look at, like, when I say what's the game giving you, the life game is always the feedback. And how do you get that feedback? Well, you pause. You pause for a moment to kind of go assess, like, where am I at right now?
Right.
And maybe that's something that, like, can be refined with the whole score thing, because it does, like, denote, like, I'm winning or losing, right?
It's very Boolean, it's very binary.
Sure.
It's like,
my kind of model of it is more about, like, well, what's the feedback I'm getting right now? And we've talked about that before, where it's like, at any point in the day, I can stop and go, hey, where am I at with this? In this quest line, what are the evidence procedures, I like to say, that I'm progressing?
Yeah.
Or if I'm on this adventure, this big sort of aim in life to help people or be of service, what's the feedback I'm getting that I know that I'm progressing?
Yeah.
And that's the challenge I often offer people, is like, well, how do you know?
Yeah.
Because we know that when we're angry, we know when we're sad, but how do we know when to do that?
Right.
Does that make sense? Like,
makes total sense to me. I've
Okay.
had the pleasure of going through the system,
Sure.
which I think, we're really just scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
So I think, what I would say before I let you go hop on the next airplane that you're going to jump on after this and get to the next location is, first off, how do I learn about Gamers Way? Like, as a viewer, like, where do I go? Like,
you go. I have a YouTube channel, Gamers Way. I also have gamersway.co.
Okay.
So you just go to gamersway.co. It's all right there.
Cool.
Got a little site on that, and you can follow me on Instagram.
Okay.
Gamers.way.
Gamers.way.
Yeah.
Cool. And then, like, obviously, there's so much to talk about. Your background, sort of the past and the present of Aaron LeMay, and sort of the career and the body of work, and how many people I know it's affecting in a positive direction.
Sure.
What's one thing we didn't talk about today that you hope that we sort of dove into, or at least scratched the surface on a little bit more on?
I think, like, what I'd love to talk about more on, maybe in the next segment, is like the pillars of the Gamer's Way, which is the player, the process of playing in the game, and how we can utilize that in our day-to-day to make life more rich.
Right. So just to sort of, like, summarize that. So the Gamer's Way, right? It's a open source cultural movement, right? That basically takes game mechanics, elements of game design you learned over 25 years in the industry, and it helps people at every stage in their life, every stage in their career, every stage in their journey level up and progress. Right.
Absolutely.
So the player,
the process of playing in
the game.
And so what that really gets down into is the player is all about the choices you make as an individual. Playing is the actions that you take, and the game is the feedback that you receive.
Right. And Aaron, are you on Twitter?
Yes, I am.
What's your Twitter handle?
Gamers Way.
Gamers Way.
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess the question for the audience then is, what play are you playing? What game are you playing? Shoot Aaron a tweet at Gamers Way on Twitter. So thanks guys for tuning in. Sena, tuning out.
Thanks.